Treatment will be withheld. The men are not to be informed of their diagnosis. The directive was never meant for public eyes. It circulated quietly through offices of the United States Public Health Service in the fall of 1932. Outside, in Macon County, Alabama, approximately 32.3668 degree N, 86.2999 degree W. The air was thick with late summer heat. Cotton fields stretched across red clay soil. Sharecroppers worked from sunrise to sundown for pennies. And 399 black men were about to become subjects in one of the most disturbing government experiments in American history. They were told they had bad blood. They were never told they had syphilis. And for 40 years, from September 12, 1932 to July 25, 1972, the United States government watched them die. The Tuskegee syphilis study did not happen in secret basements. It happened in public clinics, on official letterhead, signed by federal physicians. And for decades, it remained buried, not because it was hidden underground, but because no one in power chose to stop it. The study was officially titled the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. It began during the Great Depression under the leadership of Dr. Taliaferro Clark of the U.S. Public Health Service. Funding came in part from the Julius Rosenwald Fund, originally intended to support treatment programs for African Americans in the rural South. But when the Rosenwald Fund withdrew support, federal officials decided to continue the study, not to treat the disease, but to observe its natural progression. 600 black men were enrolled. Of those, 399 had latent syphilis. 201 served as control subjects. The men were mostly poor sharecroppers. Many were illiterate. All were promised free medical exams, hot meals, and burial insurance. They were never told the truth. In 1932, syphilis was devastating but treatable with arsenic-based therapies like salvarsan. By 1943, penicillin was widely recognized as a safe and effective cure. The U.S. Army began mass-producing penicillin for soldiers during World War II. In 1947, penicillin became the standard treatment for syphilis nationwide. But in Macon County, treatment was deliberately withheld. The decision to continue the study was documented in Public Health Service correspondence preserved in National Archives Record Group 90. Even when local draft boards began screening participants for military service during World War II and diagnosing syphilis, Public Health Service officials intervened to prevent treatment. The men were not just ignored. They were actively blocked from care. The psychological manipulation was subtle. Nurse Eunice Rivers, a black nurse hired to maintain contact with the subjects, became the face of the program. She built trust. She scheduled exams. She assured participants they were receiving medical attention. She was not the architect of the study, but she became its bridge. The language used in communication was deliberately vague. Bad blood could mean anemia, fatigue, or infection. It never meant syphilis. And certainly never meant untreated neurosyphilis, the final stage of a disease that eats the brain. Over time, the symptoms worsened. Lesions, blindness, cardiovascular damage, psychosis. Some men lost control of their limbs. Others descended into dementia. Wives contracted the disease. At least 40 women were infected. 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. All while federal doctors recorded the data. Every blood draw. Every spinal tap. Spinal taps were described to participants as special free treatment. In reality, they were diagnostic procedures used to measure neurological deterioration. The atmosphere inside the Tuskegee Institute Hospital, now Tuskegee University, was sterile but deceptively calm. White coats, clipboards, clinical smiles. The horror was not loud. It was procedural. In 1966, a Public Health Service venereal disease investigator named Peter Buxton raised ethical objections. He wrote letters to superiors questioning the morality of the study. His concerns were dismissed. The study continued. 6 more years passed. On July 25, 1972, Associated Press reporter Gene Heller broke the story. The headline exposed the truth to the nation. Public outrage followed immediately. The study was terminated by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare on October 13, 1972. A class action lawsuit was filed in 1973 on behalf of the participants. In 1974, a $10 million settlement was reached. But money cannot reverse neurological damage. It cannot resurrect the dead. The climax of Tuskegee is not a single shocking experiment. It is the realization that for 40 years, through World War II, through the Civil Rights Movement, through presidential administrations from Herbert Hoover to Richard Nixon, the U.S. government allowed men to suffer and die for data. No secret bunker. No foreign battlefield. Just rural Alabama. The justification was scientific observation. The underlying motivation was more disturbing. Racism cloaked as research. The study relied on the assumption that black bodies could be sacrificed for knowledge. The doctors involved did not view themselves as monsters. They viewed themselves as scientists, collecting longitudinal data, advancing understanding of untreated syphilis. But medical ethics had already begun evolving globally. The Nuremberg Code, established in 1947 after Nazi doctors were tried for human experimentation, required voluntary informed consent. Tuskegee continued for 25 years after that. In 1997, on May 16, 1997, President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology in the White House East Room. 5 surviving participants attended. Clinton stated, "What was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence." By then, only a handful of men remained alive. The legacy of Tuskegee reshaped American bioethics. The National Research Act of 1974 established institutional review boards to oversee human experimentation. Informed consent became mandatory. The Belmont Report, issued in 1979, defined ethical principles of respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Tuskegee became a case study in every medical school. But the psychological damage extended beyond academia. In African American communities, distrust of the healthcare system deepened. Studies have shown measurable declines in medical participation following the 1972 exposure. When public health officials later encouraged vaccinations or screenings, echoes of Tuskegee lingered. The fields in Macon County are still there. The buildings still stand. Tuskegee University continues as a respected institution. But the ghosts remain in the paperwork archived under National Archives RG-90. The dark truth is not that a rogue scientist acted alone. It is that the system functioned exactly as designed. Multiple administrations reviewed the study. Multiple medical journals published interim findings. None stopped it, because the subjects were poor, black, disposable in the eyes of power. And here is the most chilling detail. The men trusted the government. They came back year after year for examinations. They shook hands with physicians. They believed they were being helped. The betrayal was total. Tuskegee was not a classified CIA operation. It was not hidden from Congress. It was normalized. That normalization is what should disturb you, because it proves that evil does not require secrecy. It requires indifference. Indifference to suffering. Indifference to inequality. Indifference to truth. Dr. Taliaferro Clark died in 1942. Dr. Raymond Vonderlehr died in 1972. The same year, the study was exposed. Nurse Eunice Rivers died in 1986. None were criminally prosecuted. The experiment ended not because those in power had a moral awakening. It ended because a whistleblower refused to stay silent. Peter Buxton risked his career to speak. Gene Heller printed the truth. And suddenly, the nation could no longer pretend it didn't know. The Tuskegee syphilis study was not a momentary lapse. It was a 40-year commitment to data over dignity. And that is the darkest secret of all. Because if a democratic nation could rationalize this once, it can rationalize again. The next time you hear the phrase "for the sake of research," remember Macon County. Remember September 12, 1932. And remember how long silence can last.